Hola, ¿qué tal? Luna here speaking. Welcome, come in, have a seat. But before I continue with English, let me just have a second for the Spanish audience. Este pod, el L138B, es la versión original de mi charla sobre el ataque de llave inglesa con Jameson Lopp. Si te interesa escuchar este mismo contenido doblado al español por Julián Rangosh, te animo a que busques en mi canal el L138A. Back to English. We Bitcoiners do our best to self-custody our Bitcoin. We use hardware wallets. We create our own entropy. We store them in Meta. We multisig. But how do we protect our sats from a $5 branch attack? To talk about that, I sit down today with Jameson Lopp, co-founder and CTO of Casa, the company that makes it easy to buy and secure Bitcoin without wondering whether you're doing it right. With Jameson, we talk about what is this kind of attack, what should we consider to protect our sats, what are his thoughts on decoil wallets, multisig, locktimes, and coventants to protect them, and also some advices for beginners that want to start in the self-custody path. Before jumping into the show, let me have a second for my sponsors. All of them amazing Bitcoin companies that support privacy and KYC-free sats. Take a look. First, HODL and LEN, both amazing peer-to-peer sites where you can. First, exchange Bitcoin, and second, borrow and lend it. All peer-to-peer enabling KYC-free sats purchases and finance. Second, Bitrefit, the website that allows Bitcoiners to buy almost anything with sats. I use it weekly, and thanks to them, I can live the Bitcoin economy in Europe. Third, Brains, the good guys of Bitcoin mining. If you're into mining, Brains is the place to go. They created the oldest pool, also co-creators of Stratum V2. They have an amazing firmware for ASIC miners and a great blog and dashboard to be 100% updated on how is the hash rate network right now. And last but not least, IVPN, the VPN that I use because they are privacy freaks as me. They don't ask me for personal data and I can pay it with Bitcoin. You can have a look at their services following the links in the description below. With this said, te dejo con el pod. Good afternoon, Jameson.
Hi, great to be here.
Thanks for joining. You are Jameson Lopp, a cypherpunk, CTO and co-founder of Casa, the leading provider of Bitcoin self-custody solutions. I'm really excited to have you here because recently there has been a lot of talk in the Spanish Bitcoin Twitter community about how to protect yourself from a $5 branch attack. Because, when you fall down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you become like a little Bitcoin genius. You learn things like creating your own entropy with a coin, dice, or something like that. You learn using top-notch hardware wallet, using passphrase, at least 12 characters long with numbers, symbols, and so on. And also you write your seed in metal. And you feel you are really becoming a master in security. But then it comes this moment that somebody asks you, okay, but how do you protect yourself from a $5 branch attack? First of all, could you explain what is this kind of attack and why it's so often commented in Bitcoin communities?
Sure. So this actually goes back to really a meme, which was popularized by the XKCD comic a number of years ago. And I think everyone who has heard the term wrench attack has probably seen that comic. But essentially, it means coercion. It means someone is using either threat of violence against you or someone you care about, or they're actually straight up torturing you, holding you hostage, using some sort of aggravating factor to try to coerce you into handing over your money, or handing over, in this case, the keys to the kingdom. And this is a type of attack that people generally haven't had to worry about in recent years because most people's assets are intangible and not directly controlled by them. If your money is in the bank or on the stock exchange, or One of my favorite sayings that I heard somewhere was that billionaires don't have to worry about getting attacked because it's very difficult to steal a baseball team. So it's like when your assets are that type of asset, it's very difficult for you to simply just hand it over to someone. But now with Bitcoin being a digital bearer asset, it's once again like gold or cash or something that you can just simply physically hand a large amount of value over to. So we have kind of come full circle again back to the days when people would, hold their money in gold under the floorboards or whatever. So now you have to worry once again about the physical security aspects of being your own bank.
So let's say that the main problem is to have access to a lot of funds with just a few clicks, no?
Yes, it's the problem that it's highly liquid, it's highly portable, and you can basically lose it in an instant, and then there's no way to recover it, of course. So the ability to protect yourself against this type of attack means that you actually have to consider yourself a potential point of failure.
The worst nightmare for anybody, but especially for a Bitcoiner, is a home kidnap. Do you have some information on how people normally react in relation to Bitcoin holdings when, together with their family, they are home kidnapped? Do they lie or fight, or do they want to give all the Bitcoin away to finish that suffering?
It's a difficult topic to discuss because I think, or at least my guess, is that the majority of incidents we don't hear about. When someone ends up having some sort of physical threat or violence against them, unless it somehow gets leaked out by newspapers or something, in most cases, I think people are very unwilling to talk about this because they are afraid that it will make them an even bigger target for future criminals to attack them like this. So we can only really talk about, of course, the cases we know about. I do have a project where I try to keep track of all the ones that have been made public, and I think we're somewhere around 80 or 90 different incidents over the past decade. And just offhand, from what we know, it seems like the vast majority of cases when these people find themselves being physically threatened, taken hostage, tortured, whatnot, they almost always comply very quickly. People obviously don't want to be hurt or see other people they care about hurt. I'm only aware of maybe one or two incidents where people managed to successfully defend themselves against an attacker. And I think there were maybe a few other incidents where they didn't really do anything and the attacker gave up quickly and left. But it seems like most of the incidents, at least that we hear about, the attackers are successful in getting some, if not all, of the keys that person was holding.
That's that's not very optimistic for us holders, I have to say. But I wonder, from a security planner point of view, how do you evaluate when to give them away, or when to risk your life for your sats? No, it's very hard, and later I want to ask you about different solutions. But this is something that constantly comes to my head. Okay, if I want to create a strategy, here we're talking about my life and probably my family security. So it's hard to find the point, that the evaluation, no, where to put the line, where is the limit in, like, no, my sats are so important, or and then I will protect with all kind of techniques, or I don't know, let's have like a spare wallet that they can get away with.
Right. There's a number of different questions and trade-offs that need to be made here. I would start off by saying that I don't think that anyone should value their Bitcoin more than their life or the life of their loved ones, and that if you are in a situation where you're being coerced, then you should probably comply. Obviously there's a million different variables of what an attacker could be like or could be doing, and maybe it's an attacker who does not seem like they would actually be willing to go through with the threats. For example, there was an attack in Amsterdam just a few months ago where the guy basically told the attackers to stop bothering him, and they ended up leaving without doing anything. Now, that ended very well, but there have been other attacks where the attackers did use physical violence when there was resistance put up. But I think there's the first question is, what are you even capable of giving the attacker? So my stance is that if you're trying to protect a life-changing amount of money that you're storing with cryptographic keys, then you shouldn't even have direct access to it. It should be similar to trying to go to the bank and completely clean out your account of your life savings. It shouldn't be as simple as just pushing a few buttons. There should be multiple different types of authentication and physical movement required and time constraints. You want to make that process onerous. You want to make it slow. And the reason for that is that you really shouldn't need to have instantaneous, convenient access to your life savings. Generally, if you're going to be moving large amounts of money around, it's for some major purchase or large trade that you've been planning ahead of time for quite a while. So that the inconvenience around that, it really shouldn't be a major inconvenience. And the security that you can get as a trade-off with that inconvenience, it's hard to even put a price on it, because if you put yourself in a situation where you don't even have access to the money, then it becomes kind of a non-issue of there's nothing you can do, no matter what type of coercion is being used against you. Now, this of course gets us to the next question of, well, what is the attacker going to do once you start explaining to them that you can't give them anything? And this is where it gets really tricky, because what we're really doing now, this is getting out of the realm of talking about technical security measures, and it's getting into the realm of speculative psychology. And you have no idea what your attacker's motivation and situation is going to be like. And it may be that they get to the point where they eventually believe you, and then either they do nothing and leave, or maybe they hurt you or kill you, out of frustration. I would hope, but of course this really depends on a number of variables. But generally, a rational human doesn't kill another human if it's not going to get them anything. It's all that's doing is creating more risk for them and having law enforcement expend more resources to track them down. And with my own experience with different law enforcement cases, the amount of resources that law enforcement will put into tracking down a thief or a robber is very small in comparison to what they will put into tracking down a murderer.
Maybe that takes me to somewhere else. That is, okay, maybe the attacker gets some information in that attack, and he gets to know that you have, let's say, 10 Bitcoins, but that you cannot access them right now. That puts you in another position after the attack. Maybe they leave, but now they have a very important information. They knew maybe you had some Bitcoin, but they didn't know how much. And 10 Bitcoins is good enough for them to try it again. I suppose that there is a before and an after. This podcast is more about how to protect before there is a first attack, no? But the situation afterwards, I can imagine that you fall into full psychosis.
Yeah, so we may have gotten a little bit ahead of ourselves, because whenever we're talking about security, this is a multi-layered setup that you want to have. I think people probably focus on the actual key management and how am I storing and backing up my keys, and what's the actual authentication process required for spending the money. But you don't want the technical security measures around your keys to be the only layer of security. Just like when you're designing any type of security system, you want there to be multiple layers of barriers in place. And the reason for this is several fold. One, you want to have like your outermost layer of security to make you less likely to even ever be attempted to have someone attack you in the first place. And so a couple of ways to do that. The first one, and what I consider the most outer layer of security, is actually your privacy. So if you have good, strong privacy, then very few people should even know that you have Bitcoin or a significant amount of Bitcoin in the first place. The fewer people who even know that you have this digital bearer asset, the fewer who can even entertain the idea of trying to plan an attack against you. The next layer of security that I consider is really just your day-to-day physical and operational security. How do you go about your day? What is your home security system look like? Is it possible for someone to just walk up to your front door and kick it in? That's I would say, probably the level of security that the vast majority of people have, at least in the United States. I know some other countries tend to have better fortifications around their homes by default. In many cases, for example, thefts and robberies in the United States are crimes of opportunity, where someone's just walking around and they see a house and they're like, oh, that looks like it'll be easy to get into. They walk up to the front door, kick it in, and take whatever they can in the first few minutes. So if you have some additional layers of security, like some sort of fence or gate or other things that kind of push out the perimeter of wherever you're physically residing, that's just one more thing that an attacker has to get through in order to get to the good stuff. And so what happens is, for a crime of opportunity, if they're looking and surveying a whole bunch of homes, they're going to say, oh, this house has a fence or a wall, or this house has a dog, and the dog may try to bite me, whereas that one doesn't appear to have anything. So I'm going to go for the easier looking target. You want to portray yourself as a hard target just to disincentivize people from even trying. And then, of course, going on further from that, there's the question of, well, what are you capable of doing and defending yourself, or what type of alarms and other things do you have in place that would alert you if someone was trying to break in, and if you become aware that someone is trying to attack you, what are your defense mechanisms? And of course, there's a whole lot of different things that you can do, and of course, some of them are going to be jurisdiction specific based upon the laws in your area.
Some more passive systems, like how fortified is your home, and also some active like sensors and so on. This is very interesting because I'm from Spain. I don't live now in Spain. I live now in the north of Europe, and I see a huge difference. In Spain, everything is more fortified. Privacy is more important, and you would never have transparent fence nor a transparent window that people can see easy how do you live in your home. And here in the north is the opposite, probably because of the need of light, of more light. But it's crazy how transparent is everything. I could study easily the life of my neighbor and learn their routines. So that's a very interesting point that maybe I should start applying now that I live in the north. But you touch on something that this was spoken on Twitter the other day about privacy. I use a pseudonym. I don't appear in public with my face. So I believe that privacy is a feature, not a bug. But some people say, yeah, but in security, this is security through obscurity. And that shouldn't be the case. You should be ready to to be full transparent, and nevertheless, your Bitcoin should stay safe. Is in this situation as bad to plan a security through obscurity system, or you think that no, that in some cases is a good strategy?
So if your only layer of defense is privacy, then I would agree that you could call that security through obscurity. If all you're doing is hiding a bunch of information, and anyone who finds where and how you've hidden that can now attack you and get your money, then that is what I would consider security through obscurity. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of self-custody and setting up distributed key systems that are very difficult to attack, both physically and digitally. But you still want to have privacy because that can reduce the chance that someone even tries to attack you in the first place. So it's good to think of this as you want to have a diversity of different protections in place. And that's how we get strength through diversity in having different types of security and authentication mechanisms and privacy around as many different aspects of your life as possible. Because what I think you'll find whenever I talk about Casa and the way that we think about architecting solutions is that our primary focus is to prevent and eliminate single points of failure. And the way that you do that is through diversity, having redundancy in as many things as possible, and not using the same exact types of security mechanisms multiple times.
What do you think about having this, what I mentioned before, a secondary wallet? Let's say if you have 10 Bitcoin, so you have one Bitcoin there, and you just convince them that that's good enough to live. Like if you think about thieves as an entrepreneur, no, not a legal one, maybe not a moral one, but if you think about it, maybe it's good enough to take a Bitcoin away. So maybe it's a good time for you to leave and let me alone. What do you think about that?
And so yeah, whenever you're thinking about your own setup, if you're thinking adversarially, you think like an attacker, then what we're really wanting to try to understand is risk and reward. Because any attacker is going to have that same type of mindset of, what are the risks that I'm taking to try to pull off this attack, and what's the potential reward if I can pull it off. And this is where we once again get into this speculative aspect of it, because you don't know how sophisticated your attacker is going to be. You don't know how desperate they're going to be. They basically, your attacker's risk reward mindset could be all over the place. They could be willing to take a really big risk for a really small reward, whereas we would expect a more rational person would only want to take a small risk for a large reward. But you never know. And of course, it could be a simple crime of opportunity of someone who is otherwise destitute, or maybe has some huge debt that they have to pay off very quickly. Otherwise, something bad is going to happen to them. You never know what someone's particular situation is going to be. So along that same mindset, if we're talking about, should we have a decoy wallet, then what we're really saying is we're speculating around, what the payoff that this person will be satisfied with. And I have no way of speculating that, because once again, we have no idea what the attacker's profile is going to be. So I generally assume, the worst case scenario is that they, like you said before, they may have gained some information that gives them an expectation of a certain amount of value that you have. And if you offer them a small fraction of that, they may only get angrier and do, worse things out of sort of retaliation. So I'm not a fan of decoy wallets, but also don't have any real world information because as far as I'm aware from all of these physical attacks that I have cataloged, I have never heard of a situation where someone said, oh, I had a decoy wallet and I gave them that and they left. And it's possible that that has happened and the person just didn't want to admit that later because it would have made them a target again. But we just don't know. There's First of all, there's so few data points as it is. Like I said, less than 100 data points that we're aware of. I'm sure there are far more incidents we're not aware of. But if we're just doing this, based upon the facts of what we know, the short version is I have no idea, and I don't like speculating. I like being conservative.
Well, doesn't matter what is your choice. It feels like you will always get beaten. And even if you try to convince them that you only have one Bitcoin, you can try to lie to them, like this is all what I have, but you will probably get beaten. You can try to be reasonable and tell them I have 10, but I'm only able to give you right now one. You probably will get beaten. So I think that yeah, at least there is a maybe, no. But once they are in and once they have this purpose to attack you, I think that they will harm you. So it's then this takes me to another place. That is another possibility. That is okay. You can make it impossible to access the Bitcoin, and here you have different systems. Here is possible. Probably where Casa comes in. You can create a multisig, for example, and one key you have it with Casa, and the other two you can access them, but not immediately. You have them somewhere else. You have even one can be in a bank. There are other possibilities. You can trust the custody of your funds to a third party. What do you think about that? Of locking all your funds somewhere?
So there's a couple ways to look at this, of course. I think we're kind of focusing on the immediate issue of harm and trying to just, pay someone off, essentially buy your safety back, at least temporarily. That's one way of looking at it. My way, I guess, first of all, I hate even the idea of potentially being a victim, and I guess I would rather go down with the ship, as it were, and die knowing that my attacker got nothing. I think that would please me more because I hate the idea of having someone successfully pull off an attack against me. But even putting those like individual perspectives aside, because neither perspective is right or wrong. It's just your own opinions on what you're willing to have happen. I think the broader issue is one of the entire ecosystem, and like one of the reasons why I'm such a big proponent of really strong self custody is that, like we said, this is a risk reward type of situation that criminals are evaluating. And at a really high level, as Bitcoin adoption continues to increase, this is a constantly changing risk reward profile where Bitcoin goes more mainstream. The result of that is that more people adopt Bitcoin. The secondary result of that is that more criminals or more people who are willing to hurt people start thinking about Bitcoin holders and how to attack them and what they might get out of them. And if we as Bitcoin holders want to discourage attacks against us, then we don't want to essentially set precedents. We don't want to create a default system that is easy for these wrench attacks to happen. So, if wrench attacks start becoming more and more common and the criminals are essentially getting more and more money as a result of them, then that that's going to create a trend, I believe, that will be very hard to push back against. I think it's much better if we have the vast majority of self-custody Bitcoin people in a situation where they are able to repel these attacks, and as a result, the criminal element starts to see the risk reward as being a higher risk with a lower chance of success. This is kind of a hand wavy, it's not a quantifiable thing. It's more of a trying to steer the whole direction of the security of the ecosystem.
And in those lines, there is also another theory in the community that is not privacy, but the opposite, to be completely open about how are you storing your Bitcoin. Imagine that I say, no, I don't have access to my keys, and to move any Bitcoin, I have to have a call with Casa, and they have to see that everything is okay, let's say, or I have to request, and it's 24-hour delay, and I'm completely clear on it, so that nobody thinks that I'm a candidate for an attack. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is just an American thing, but have you ever been in a store, or at least in America, it's usually gas stations or stores that are open 24 hours a day, and at higher risk of like a nighttime robbery. But there's a number of these type of stores where they will have signs that say, cashier only has $50, and all the money gets put into the safe, every 12 hours, and the safe is on a timer that can only be open like once a week with the right key. And they put that sign at the very front. So, this as like you said, a sort of transparent security mechanism, there is good precedent for this. There is reason to believe that that will dissuade a lot of people. And so, saying if you're going to go the route of saying being like a publicly known Bitcoin holder, which there are reasons to do that if you want to help the adoption of the ecosystem, then saying this Bitcoin holder does not have access or does not have direct access to their keys, to their funds. It's the same type of thing, and that ought to dissuade most people. Maybe someone will choose not to believe you and try anyways, but I think I think you know putting that type of security statement up front, I don't really see any downsides from it if you're already open about being a Bitcoin holder.
This is a very interesting point. And then also another topic that we spoke a lot was about lock times. Some members were saying that they believe lock times are the way, because even to publish it, no, like, hey, my funds are under lock time, so that an attacker doesn't want to attack them. In my opinion, I'm not a very big fan, but I wanted to know what's your opinion on lock times.
Yeah, I'm not a fan for multiple reasons. The first reason is there simply are not many Bitcoin wallets that make that a user-friendly feature. The next reason is that if you do put your funds into a lock time address, then you have to have some mechanism to keep renewing that. So it becomes a question of, are you locking them for a month, 6 months, a year, 10 years, and then if so, how do you ensure that you relock them as soon as they become unlocked? There's also issues around recovery of these wallets. Whenever you start putting lock times into the redeem script of a Bitcoin address, you're creating non-deterministic data, which means you can no longer recover your money with only the seed phrase. So you're now going to have to start creating backups with other data. And once again, and I've played around with this a little bit, and I'm just not aware of any wallets that make it very easy for you to reconstruct lock time addresses, especially if there's multiple different lock times on your different addresses. And then, I mean, I'm sure I could come up with a lot of things, but the one final thing is, okay, let's assume a situation where you have your keys, your seed, all the stuff you need to recreate your wallet, um, and you get wrench attacked, and they take all of it. What happens when that lock time gets surpassed? Well, now if the attacker took the only copy of your stuff, they just sweep the funds once it becomes unlocked. If you had multiple copies and you load up and reconstitute your wallet and they've reconstituted your wallet, then at the time that it becomes unlocked, both of you essentially enter into a race to try to sweep those funds, and it sort of becomes a race to the bottom. So effectively, what you could see happen from a technical standpoint is both you and the attacker are basically creating replace by fee transactions that are offering higher and higher miner fees to get a fast confirmation on those funds. And think of it of the attacker really has nothing to lose, so like they would be willing to spend 99% of your money in fees if it meant they got 1%. So it's not, it doesn't hold up very well, I think, in adversarial situations. It also um, makes, I believe, the chance of loss due to just user error a lot higher. And that's, we're spending this entire episode, of course, talking about physical attackers, but I do want to make it very clear that in the grand scheme of things, you're far more likely to screw up and just simply lock yourself out of your own money than you are to have someone physically attack you for your keys.
Yeah, I said that I'm not a big fan of lock times, basically because of a fee raise. I believe that if you don't include the lock time inside the redeem script, then it's public to everyone. When is the lock time finishing? No, am I right in this?
Well, I mean, there's multiple. Okay, so there's multiple ways to do lock times, and I am assuming that you're going to use the check lock time verify way, which means that you basically have a redeem script that has either the block height or the timestamp in, I think, milliseconds or seconds in the redeem script. So that you know the address, the Bitcoin address that gets seen publicly on the blockchain where you deposit into it, that's a hash of the redeem script. So nobody knows what that actual block height or timestamp is until you spend from that address. So that means, of course, you have to be storing that information somewhere yourself if you want to be able to reconstitute and spend from the wallet.
Yeah, and if not, because this is what was coming to my mind, no? There is this, in every transaction, there is this parameter of lock time. I think it's the last 4 bytes of every transaction, normally is set to 0000. But I suppose that could be used outside the redeem script, but then
so that is the in lock time parameter, which has been around for quite a long time. However, it may be that people get confused because, like I said, there's 3 different types of time locks in Bitcoin, and they all do different things. The in lock time that is public, on every transaction, that means that the transaction is not valid to be, published, broadcast, and confirmed before that specific time. So if you're using that type of lock on your transaction, it's not
it doesn't
actually
even propagate.
well, yeah. So the way that you would have to do that type of lock time is what you're really doing. It only really works if you're creating a pre-signed transaction that is spending money to go somewhere. And there are a lot of cool things that you can do with that. You can start creating these like different transaction chains that move money around, and like basically creating a vaulting protocol. But I believe that is generally not what people are thinking about when they say, I want to, lock time all of my money. And what they really want in that case is the check lock time verify functionality, which goes into the redeem script.
Are you excited about covenants?
I mean, covenants are something people have been talking about for many years, and it's still kind of vague and hand wavy. And so, for me, it's all about practicality. One of the one of the potential downsides, of course, is just more complexity. Whenever you're introducing more complexity, there's more things that can potentially go wrong. But I'm keeping track of these different projects. I think there's the Revault project. And then you can do, Jeremy Rubin's doing some interesting things with his Sapio project. And I guess it's the check template verify opcode that he's trying to get more support for. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to, what can we kind of standardize around? What makes sense? What's robust and simple enough that, doesn't introduce complexity and foot guns where people can, shoot themselves in the foot. That's one of the things at Casa where we have purposefully avoided adding a lot of the more advanced functionality into Casa because there's generally a lot of ways that it can be, I would say, misused to the user's detriment. So that's why, for example, we don't have lock time stuff in Casa because it would end up creating a lot more complexity around managing the UTXOs, managing the time locks, managing backups, and being able to recreate wallets outside of Casa. In general, I think that the potential downsides outweigh the upsides.
And now that you mentioned Casa, how does a Casa user benefit in the case of a $5 branch attack?
Well, so we've had actually a handful of users who have been robbed in different ways over the years, and Casa has successfully prevented funds from being lost from their Casa setup. We have had users that have essentially been coerced into opening up their exchange wallets and withdrawing all the money from there. But what it really comes down to is the fact that the client does not have enough keys on them at the time that they are attacked. And I don't know specific, or at least most of these situations, I think robberies occurred when they were not home, and of course, there's just not enough key material in the home for the wallet to be spent from. But in one case where we had a client who was actually, physically, drugged and coerced into moving their money, the fact that they didn't have the keys on them, I think, was what really was their saving grace. And that even though the attacker got the phone and was able to withdraw all the money from the different apps that they had on their phone, they couldn't do it from Casa because they only had the mobile key. They only had one of the 5 keys for that client.
As a final question, I wanted to ask you, if somebody asked you what would be the most important advice when you want to self-custody your life saving Bitcoin, what would you tell them?
Well, there are many different forms of both attack and loss that you have to be worried about. And like I said, you should be more worried about losing access to your keys than you should about having them stolen from you. As soon as you get to the point where you're keeping your keys offline, on hardware devices, you're pretty safe against the common forms of hacking. And then it comes down to, well, what happens if some sort of disaster occurs where we start losing access to keys? So you then have to just think about, what is every possible thing that could go wrong? What if the house burns down? What if there's a flood? You should assume that any given location that you're keeping key material in can be destroyed or compromised. And so you just want to have, multiple redundant backups of that key material that are distributed widely enough that you're comfortable that no single incident will wipe enough of them out. And then, once you get to that level of robustness, the final thing that I think a lot of people don't consider, because I think a lot of the adopters in the space are still fairly young, is that you also need to worry about yourself being a point of failure. None of us know how long we're going to be around. You could get hit by a truck crossing the street. What happens? In a situation like that where you are incapacitated, or coerced, like we've spent a lot of time talking about, but really incapacitated is far more likely. Can your loved ones then access your money? And that is where things can get a lot more complicated, because you start having to balance a very fine line between assuring that only you have access to your keys, but also assuring that specific other people have access to them if you're no longer able to access them yourself. And so that's where you want to think about inheritance. Generally, I recommend people read Pamela Morgan's Crypto Asset Inheritance Planning Guide. I'm not sure if it's been translated.
It's about to be published in Spanish. I saw Andreas yesterday doing a tweet about it.
Perfect. So once that gets published, definitely read that. I myself learned a lot from that book when I was thinking through it, simply because I wasn't familiar with a lot of the edge cases around estate planning and things that can go wrong there. But over the past year or two, that's also something that we've spent a lot of time at Casa thinking about, both from a technical standpoint and a legal standpoint of, how do you build key and wallet recovery into the estate planning process, and how do you make sure that it's bulletproof, because you don't want to create a fragile system that you never test, and then once you're gone, your family gets together and tries to figure out how to follow your instructions and finds that they don't know how, and they essentially can't recover your money.
They are not pirates, and they don't want to be looking for the treasure for many years. No, I did a podcast about that book, and I covered it quite deeply. And yeah, it's great. It will be a great opportunity to have it in Spanish. Jameson, thank you very much for this talk. Hope that this clarifies a lot of the questions that I have been reading lately, and that maybe pushes some people to think about Casa or to think about other security measures that will keep their Bitcoin safe. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me.